All right, guys. So today we're back with a slightly different style of video. We have Dricus Du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman at UFC Oklahoma this Saturday. And instead of breaking down who's gonna win certain fights on this card, I'm actually gonna show you guys how I use Polymarket and Kalshi, which are the premier prediction market platforms, to find niche UFC markets and use my ball knowledge to make money through prediction markets. Now, if you're familiar with them, that's great. I have 4 markets I'm breaking down. A couple of them are for this weekend's card, and a couple of them are for UFC futures for the end of the year. So I have 4 different spots that I think are pretty cool that I wanted to showcase. If you're unfamiliar with how prediction markets work, don't worry. I'm going to quickly explain to you mechanically how to use them. So like I said, if you're familiar with them, feel free to skip over the next part of this video and jump right into the 4 markets. But if you're unfamiliar, I'm going to quickly break this stuff down so you have a better understanding. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. But without further ado, let's get right into this video. All right, so before I jump into the markets that I put to the side to kind of showcase in this video that you can potentially take advantage of, I'm going to quickly explain how prediction markets work for anyone who's unfamiliar with it. It's a really cool tool you can definitely use if you have ball knowledge, which the way I think about it, this is an MMA account. I watch a lot of UFC, but everyone has their own passions and hobbies. Everyone has their own thing that they're a little bit obsessed with that, if you stop 10 people on the street and asked about that topic, you might be in the top 1 or 2% in knowledge of that specific thing, whatever that is you may consume. So prediction markets are interesting because you can kind of trade/bet on anything, which means that there are markets about that thing that you might be obsessed with, which means you might have an edge on a lot of people. There's markets about TV shows. There's TV shows I don't watch, but obviously if the TV show you watch and me and you are betting against, a random market on that TV show, you're going to have a great edge on beating me in those bets. So it's really interesting. I think there's a real world where prediction markets help out a lot of people when it comes to news and truth and stuff like that. But also, if you want to make some extra money, I think there's money lying on the ground here, especially if you are obsessed with one specific thing. You're really solid into it, and you can kind of find markets to kind of back up some of your knowledge. Things get really interesting. So I'm going to quickly explain how this works. I have the Dricus Du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman fight pulled up right here, as you can see. And you see these odds, 67%, 33% for Kamaru Usman. These essentially, if you want to translate into betting odds, so like 67%, for example, is minus 203. And then you kind of look at the sports book, he's minus 245. So you're getting a little bit of a better price here on both sides. 33% on Usman, he's plus 210 here. But if you put 33%, you see that it's plus 203. So actually, you're getting a worse line on Kamaru Usman right now. On Kalshi, because I guess people are just higher on DDP on Kalshi right now. And that's kind of the way this works. It works on an order book basis. So this is like essentially everything that matters. This is where you see what people are willing to pay or, take on a bet. So DDP, essentially, if you want to go and bet on DDP right now, this 67% was the last price it was traded at. You can't get this price. You're basically paying 69% for DDP on this right now. There's 200,000 contracts, and if you want to buy DDP, you got to pay 69 cents. Now, if you can basically set an offer as well. So there's 24,000 contracts set at 68 cents. And the way this basically works is essentially you bet 69 cents on DDP. If he wins, you get $1. So let's just say you want 100 contracts of this. Each contract costs $69. You would bet $69. And then at the end of the day, if DDP wins, then your $69 turns into $100. That's how each contract works. And obviously, you can say, I don't want to pay $69 for 100 contracts. I want to pay $68 for 100 contracts. And that's what this guy's doing. Basically, for 24,000 contracts, he's willing to pay 68 cents per contract. But, no one's willing to give that to him just yet. So right now, if you come in, you want to bet on Kamaru, you would basically be paying, you'd get 32 cents per contract for Kamaru. But if you want to bet on DDP, you'd have to pay 69 cents. So there's that 1 cent spread. It's essentially like an order book, the way kind of it works in stocks and XYZ and whatnot. And that's essentially how it works. Obviously, if you have any questions about this stuff, I don't want to dive too deep into it, but if you don't understand it or you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd be happy to respond to it. I kind of like mess around on this stuff for quite a bit in the day, so it's something I'm pretty interested in. So I'd be happy to help anyone who wants to learn some of this stuff. But that's essentially how this kind of works. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you guys with before I jump into some of the markets I want to break down is that, when you're trading stocks or maybe sports betting, you could be trading crypto, you could be trading, gold for all I care, buying real estate, whatever it is. In these transactions, there's always like a counterparty, right? And the counterparty essentially has the opposite view other than you. So if a stock goes up, let's say you buy a stock, someone is selling you the stock while you're buying it. Now, obviously, the person selling you the stock, there could be other reasons, but for the most part, they don't believe the stock's going to continue to go up. That's why they're selling it. If they really had cool belief that it's going to go up at a pretty good rate, then they wouldn't sell it to you at that price. Now you're buying the stock because you think it'll go up. Obviously, you're not buying a stock that you think will go down. Similarly, with crypto or anything like that, your counterparty is someone who has the opposite view to you. Now, when you do stuff like sports betting, for example, you're going up against these multi-million-dollar books, things like big corporations, and even when you're in the stock market, like you're going up against huge funds and stuff like that. So your counterparties are just much more equipped to beat you in the long run in these markets. But prediction markets is very interesting because you see some very niche markets in prediction markets, and everyone has that little thing that they're obsessed with, that they know so much about. And the thing is, because you can bet on anything on prediction markets, there's probably going to be a market for that one thing that you're really interested in. For me, that happens to be the UFC, happens to be MMA, and I'm finding really cool markets around it. But I would say that, if there's that one thing you're really obsessed with, really interested in, you can use your ball knowledge to kind of find those markets and then see if you can find an edge. Because let's just say there's a TV show that people are betting on and trading on, and I don't watch that show, but you watch it every single week, you're probably going to make more money in those markets than I am. So if there's that thing you're obsessed with, like for example, if you put me in a UFC trivia, I think I'll do really well, which is why I also think like when I take these UFC markets, there's random people betting against me. And I think that I'm just more aware, more equipped versus like a sports book. Obviously, you're going through big analytical models, how they come up with the odds. They obviously make money on big spreads as well. So there's really, like, it's a tough thing to beat a sports book in the long run, but winning on a prediction market in the long run is pretty interesting because if you find your little pocket that you kind of know a shit ton about, you're going to be going up against people who know just much less than you, and you'll consistently be winning. So that's something I'll leave you guys with when it comes to prediction markets. Like I said, if you have any other questions about this stuff, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments. Just leave them there. Anything you kind of want to learn or know about, anything you didn't understand. But without further ado, let's jump right into some of the markets that I've put to the side, where I think you can find like a little bit of an edge, especially in this upcoming week and for futures on UFC as well. All right, guys. So the first market I want to break down is probably my favorite find of the entire week, is an announcer mention market for Dricus du Plessis versus Kamaru Usman. Now, I know this is going to sound degen, but please just stick with me. There's actually a lot of logic in this bet specifically. So hear me out here when I talk about this. Essentially, you're betting on what words or terms or phrases the announcers are going to say within a UFC fight. So for example, the fight kind of starts at the start of the first bell, and then until the referee raises the winner's hand, anything said in that time frame counts towards these markets. So that is essentially what you're betting on here. And I know it sounds insane, but it is kind of a way to find a real edge in this. It's a way to use your ball knowledge to kind of make some money. So I'll show you how I picked up, I think, what about is like $130 just on the ground on this market. And I'll show you guys what I mean about it. So championship is essentially the term. You can see I have a position here. It says 603, which means I have 603 shares at around 39 cents, which is like 39%, for example. So if my shares, which I paid $237 for, if they say the word championship in that time frame of the DDP versus Kamaru Usman fight, then I get $603. I make the difference between 603 and 237. That's my profit. I'm already up a little bit of money based on how the market's moved because it's at about 45%, and I bought it at 39%. So I have some unrealized gains here as well. So this is kind of how this market works, and the reason why I bought championship, yes, I'll explain it to you, right? So if you kind of think about this just off the top of your head, you might think like, oh, undisputed champion, maybe talk about the championship belt, championship fight, things like that, which could come up. I think they're a lot less likely to come up. Maybe they say former champion, but I don't think champion resolves championship to yes. I think they have to say the word championship. But the reason why championship yes, I think at 39% was just amazing buy, is because when a fight heads into round 4 is when they say championship rounds. And I've been watching for a very long time. I've been using this championship angle for a very long time, and it is almost virtually zero risk that once a fight hits round 4, the word championship will be said in a fight. It's like virtually zero risk. So what I think is that this market should align pretty well with fight to start round 4. Now, if you go look at a sports book here on DraftKings, fight to start round 4 is minus 250. Now, if we go to our calculator here, minus 250 is 71% probability. So DraftKings basically is telling you at 71% probability this fight starts round 4. Now, if I put 39% or 39.5, whatever like I paid for, plus 153. So essentially, I got this minus 250 bet for plus 153, and I can hedge it out by buying a bunch of no because I have 200. I have just over 200 bucks on championship. Yes. Now, if I buy, probably around a similar amount on, the no here to fight not to start round four, then, if the fight gets ended early because DDP knocks out Usman, which I think is possible, I think that's like the real. I mean, even if it ends in something else, like a submission or any reason for this fight to end early and we not see this fight go to round four, where a majority of the equity of them saying championship actually happens, then I basically hedge out and I probably still make about 130 bucks or so because I basically have both of these sides for plus one. I have this side for plus 150. I have this side for plus 180. I can't lose. I basically hedged out both my sides. I have free profit, just for money on the ground because someone decided to sell me championship yes for 39 cents. That is essentially how this works. So, once again, just like how I said when I explained it before, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments because, I mean, I don't know how complicated some of this might be, but the way I see it is essentially championship is going to be said when this fight starts round four. I've like done this a lot of times. The risk there is pretty much zero. And, on the other side, on the flip side, I think this fight going deep is, very likely. The sportsbook agrees about minus 250, about a 70% chance that this fight goes deep into the championship rounds. In that case, this is an amazing spot. And you can also hedge it out. Essentially, finding a mispriced line. This market was insane. One of my favorite finds of the week. Stuff like this is all over the place. I'd be kind of curious, or sorry, I'd be kind of careful when it comes to these mentioned markets, though, because you might see something like knockout or knocked out and think that if a fight ends in a knockout, that's when this is said, which obviously is kind of true, but this market doesn't purely align with like a KO prop, for example, because a fight could go and end in a 30-second knockout where they say, oh, he put him to sleep, oh, he got a TKO, oh, he's done, the fight's over, quick finish, something like that. They can say all that stuff, put him to sleep, yeah. And in that scenario, they don't say the word knockout, so that just doesn't happen. This still resolves to no, even though the fight ended in a knockout. Same with decision or judge. And then on the flip side, a fight could go to the distance, and they still say knockout because he's coming off of a knockout, or he had a brutal knockout. How did he recover? He needs a knockout. Sometimes they could say he needs a finish. So you kind of have to be aware as to like how these terms are played. It's a little bit of a science. It's also a little bit of getting the hang of it once you play these enough. But then you do find spots like this where, championship, in my opinion here, I think it's super clean. It's one of my favorite ones, honestly, championship, when it comes to announcer mentions, because it's just so solid to the fight to start round four. So whenever those misalign and, this one happened to misalign super heavy, I think that, it becomes like pretty easy to kind of pick up some money on the ground. So that's market number one. Let's move on to market number two. All right, guys. So the next market that I want to break down is the Tommy McMillan versus Alberto Montes announcer mentions. Now, this one is more of a directional bet. It's not as sound as the last one, but I think it's a really good spot. And on top of that, I think it's fairly low risk. I think it's one that hits at this price for sure. But at the end of the day, it's a directional bet. So the last one, we arbed it out. We can't lose. We're picking up money off the ground. This one, obviously, there is a little bit more risk where we can lose. But that being said, I think it's a really good price. And it's essentially the announcers say the word choke, choked, or chokehold within the fight. Now, remember, it is from the first round bell all the way up until a hand is raised by the referee. So that's kind of the context of, the time frame where everything hits. And, in Alberto Montes' UFC debut, he did win by Darce choke. I think he won his Dana White Contender Series fight by Anaconda choke as well. I have it pulled up here. Yeah. So, wins DWCS Anaconda choke. Before that Anaconda choke, Darce choke. He loves the front choke, right? And not only does he love the front choke, but he's essentially just like a specialist with those two. 7 of his 11 wins have been by submission. And, go back and watch his fight against Ricky Tercios. The announcers say the word choke at least 3 times just in the first round. He gets the choke in the second round. So this guy doesn't need to even get the choke for them to say this word. He is such a specialist, and this is such a big part of his game that, is going to be something that they mention. Like, I'm like very confident that this is said whether he gets the choke or not. Like, this is not me thinking, Alberto Montes is going to win this fight. Honestly, I do think Alberto Montes wins this fight, but, even if you're on the Tommy McMillan side, like they will, they should, and I really think that they do say this term because he is such a specialist. Go watch the commentary on the first one, and not only that, it's just that he also after that got another Darce choke in that fight. So going into this next one, saying Tommy McMillan has to be aware of those front chokes, has to be aware of the Anaconda choke, aware of the Darce choke. He won his last fight by Darce choke. He won his Contender Series fight by Anaconda choke. Like, there's so many ways for them to bring up that term because of how much of a specialist Alberto Montes is, that, I think essentially at, what is 44% underdog odds, I'm actually down on it. You get some more shares at 175, or sorry, you can get 175 shares at 41%. So, right now, essentially, you're getting this at an implied probability of 41%, which is plus 144. I think this is a great bet. See, like, you can go find some underdogs on your sports book and stuff like that, but I prefer to do it this way, where I think that this is a solid bet for plus 144. Now, obviously, if McMillan goes and gets an early KO or something, that really cuts down the time as to what they can say. But do we see an early KO happening in this fight? Not really. I mean, McMillan, he does get knockouts, but I think it's more of like a war of attrition than it is like a one-shot pop KO for McMillan. On top of that, I think Montes is actually a super solid prospect, fairly blue chip. I think borderline blue chip prospect as well in his own right. And like I said, I actually think he wins this fight. So, give me this one. I like choke in this scenario. I have about 136 shares on this one, but I think it's a decent market. I think it's a good way to play it. Like I said, Montes, complete specialist, and that's going to matter here. Let's move on to the next market we want to break down. All right, so the next market, we're now on Polymarket to trade this one. It's who will be the lightweight champion at the end of 2026. And, I see some value here in Justin Gaethje. Now, you can see 71% here. That was his last traded price. But once again, we got to look at the order book. If you want to buy this right now, you're going to buy it at 80%. But at the same time, the highest anyone's willing to pay right now is 64.7 percent for Justin Gaethje to remain champion. And I think there's some juice here. You'll be surprised if you leave some open bids, what you end up getting filled on these markets. Now, you might think no one will buy it, but I think that, at the end of the day, I think that Justin Gaethje already mentioned he doesn't want to fight until next year. He's going to take time off. He's already fought twice this year. Became the interim champ, then became the undisputed champ. Lightweight is also one of those interesting divisions where a lot of the top guys just like are the stars, and the UFC is in dire need of stars. But like those top guys is going to be hard to book often. Ilya, obviously one of the biggest stars in the UFC. Armand became one of the biggest stars. Paddy Pimblett, one of the biggest stars. Charles Oliveira, has always been a massive name. So those four guys are kind of in the title mix in the top of the division. Max Holloway, Paddy Pimblett, these are just like matchups that, Paddy Pimblett's going to be tough. He lost to Gaethje early on. Max Holloway is an interesting one, but he just moved up to 170. Charles Oliveira is, probably like the one that's like right in front of his face. But at the same time, Arman Tsarukyan is there, who's probably the most deserving of a title shot. So scheduling in the lightweight division is a mess. I think, honestly, they probably need some like clear number one contender fight for this to play out. It's going to be interesting because if we get Ilya versus Paddy and then we get Charles versus Arman, I think the winners of either of those fights are going to, have a claim to the next title shot. But all this to be said, that I think there needs to be some cleaning up to do in the lightweight division when it comes to contenders before, Justin Gaethje needs to get involved. And Gaethje also already said he doesn't want to fight, this year. 3 fights would be like very active for someone at the top end, especially at this era of the UFC. There's not that much going on. So I think that, Justin Gaethje to remain the lightweight champion by the end of 2026 is a solid one. I think, if I can get someone to fill this, so we're going to place a limit order here. Right here, you'll see it go in. So yeah, you see this is a bot 65.1. So bots will sometimes jump in, try to outdo you just by a little bit. But essentially, as people come in here and buy, if people think that Arman might deserve this, I think he probably has, the next best odds. But honestly, even Arman, I just don't think the fight gets booked within 2026. That's kind of the main thing I'm betting on here. So, Gaethje here, we're going to open this order. Hopefully this bot fucks off at some point. If no one fills it, it should go away. But this bot's just going to troll us here. But we're going to keep this order at 65 cents for Gaethje to stay, the lightweight champion at the end of 2026. Like I said, mainly like a scheduling play. When you look at the top of the division, there's a bunch of contenders that all have different claims. So I think the UFC will probably clean that up, make some big fight nights, but I don't see them announcing another lightweight undisputed title fight, this year. I think maybe the BMF belt moves around, something like that. But I think Justin Gaethje stays champ. Let's move on to the next market. All right, guys. So the last market that I want to talk about here is who will be the UFC heavyweight champion at the end of 2026. Now, we have about 4 remaining numbered cards in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. That's kind of around how the schedule normally aligns. I think after UFC 330, we're going to get 4 more cards. And I think within the time frame of September to December, which is where this market lies, there's a ton of value in buying Tom Aspinall to stay as a UFC heavyweight champion at the end of 2026. Now, something to note here is you always need to read the rules when you're on these books, and it clearly highlights that interim champions will not count, which is obviously huge here because Tom Aspinall has the undisputed belt, and in order to get the undisputed belt, you either have to fight Tom Aspinall for it, or they have to strip Tom Aspinall and then make a fight for the undisputed belt. In which case, then you have to go win that one. So, Cyril Gahn obviously has a claim. I mean, he is the interim champ right now. And Tom Aspinall with the undisputed belt. I think this is kind of where it comes down to. Now, Tom Aspinall has had a bunch of drama with Dana White, a bunch of drama with the UFC. The UFC has handled Tom Aspinall's career extremely poorly. And honestly, if I'm Tom Aspinall, I kind of understand. He got super hoed by the whole John Jones Stipe fight. That took so long, and then after that, John Jones is just kind of like messing around saying he wants 30 million, then he gets 30 million. UFC calls his bluff. Then John Jones is like, nah, fuck that. I'm not gonna fight. So the whole John Jones thing really fucked up Tom Aspinall's kind of career. And then after that, the fight against Cyril Gahn. Now, I have my own opinions on that. Honestly, I didn't think the eye poke was as bad as it is, but at the same time, I'm not a fighter, and maybe if Cyril Gahn poked me in the eye like that, I probably wouldn't like it at all. But at the end of the day, even whether or not the eye poke was as serious as Aspinall made it seem or not, I think Dana White has kind of a responsibility to kind of back his fighter, back his, UFC heavyweight champion, while the other guy is clearly committing a foul, something against the rules, which Dana White did not do. So I think that, the UFC and Dana White have really kind of screwed over Tom Aspinall. Now, Tom Aspinall goes out there and gets Eddie Hearn to be his manager, and Eddie Hearn and Dana White are, at odds at all times. So I really struggle to see how a heavyweight championship fight gets booked in the months of September to December where Tom Aspinall is fighting. I think Tom Aspinall is going to take a hot minute to get back in the octagon. I think there is a chance we might never see Tom Aspinall fight in the UFC again. I think it's that bad. And Eddie Hearn says things like, if it was up to me, I'll advise Tom Aspinall to just never fight for the money he's making. I don't think the UFC is people that are big into renegotiating contracts while they're still on. I mean, Tom Aspinall did sign the contract he's on right now, so I just think that there's way too much conflict here for the UFC heavyweight belt to change hands in 2026. Now, what you can say is possible is Tom Aspinall getting stripped of the belt, but I think for the amount of time they took to strip John Jones of the heavyweight belt, like stripping Tom Aspinall, just doesn't make a shit ton of sense in my opinion. And honestly, even if he does get stripped, does the next fight get booked within 2026? I just think that the timeline is too short, and for you to get Tom Aspinall, I mean 46% last traded, which is like literally plus money. Obviously, we can check here for you guys to check plus 117. That is insanely good value, even up here at 57.58. Now you also got to understand, if Tom Aspinall does get booked, he's also probably going to be a favorite to win that fight. So if Aspinall gets booked against Gahn, I mean, maybe after Gahn, did Alex Pereira like completely just slammed him out? Maybe, it might be like a pick 'em fight, or maybe even Aspinall's a small underdog. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's like the percentage chance of a fight getting booked plus the percentage chance of, Aspinall winning that fight. And then you also have to include the percentage chance of him potentially getting stripped as like a negative for you. So I think that if you include all of those, these 57-cent shares, these 58-cent shares, I think are extremely highly valuable. I'm going to try to get it a little bit cheaper just because, we have some time and I don't want to lock up capital while we have time. But, as, the timer ticks down, I might even just go and pick up these shares just at, as a market buy if I want to. So I'm going to kind of just go in at 50 cents for a plus 100 clean one, place a bid to try and grab 100 shares here because I think Tom Aspinall does stay champion at the end of 2026 for the UFC heavyweight division. And yeah, just in general, I mean, I want to kind of showcase, these futures on Polymarket. Polymarket will have futures pretty similar to what you find on your sports book, but the only difference is you can kind of set your price like this. You can kind of find, different value versus a sports book just telling you a price, and you kind of have to take that. And then on Kalshi, you have this really cool markets like how, what the announcers say and stuff like that, which, like I showed you, correlate with different betting lines, and you can kind of find some real value there. So, I really just want to showcase these markets to you guys. I thought they were pretty cool. I thought, we have some good spots for the upcoming card in UFC Oklahoma for DDP versus Kamaru Usman. I think DDP wins that fight. So, honestly, if you take something away from this video and, you end up hopping on a Kalshi and, taking some of the announcer mentions and arbitraging out with championship and fight to start round four, that'd be really cool. So let me know in the comments if you do that. Also, if you have any questions around prediction markets, how they work mechanically, or, anything you kind of want to try out on this, drop them in the comments. I'll be happy to respond to them. I kind of spend quite a bit of time in this realm on a daily basis, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of it. But also, if it's something that I'm getting wrong and you kind of are an expert on this, let me know as well. I'd love to learn from you guys as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.